On Liberty is an 1859 work of political theory by the British author John Stuart Mill. Mill was born on the outskirts of London in 1806. His father was the prominent utilitarian James Mill, who, together with the founder of utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham, organised John Stuart Mill's education so that it conformed entirely to the principles of reason. Utilitarianism is the philosophical claim that the morally right thing to do is whatever brings the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest number of people. That applies to personal behaviour. If you want to be a good person, then try to make people happy, as well as to public policy. A good government should pursue projects that increase citizens' happiness. John Stuart Mill was brought up to be a second-generation champion of this theory, which in fact he eventually became, but with reservations. Because undiluted utilitarianism has its problems. Under certain circumstances, it might be possible to make a huge number of people happy by persecuting a tiny minority. Would that be moral? Obviously not. Or it might be possible to make everyone happy by extinguishing the brain's intellectual parts and stimulating its pleasure centres. Would that be moral? Probably not. In fact, Mill's education helped alert him to these problems. Its emphasis was entirely on logic and fact at the expense of sentiment. As a result, he experienced a breakdown in early adulthood, believing himself to be a monster incapable of feeling. The crisis passed when he read a mawkish novel and burst into tears, persuading him that yes, he was capable of feeling after all. Henceforth, he systematically sought to expand his field of experience and learning. In 1830, he met a married woman a year younger than himself, called Harriet Taylor. The two immediately recognized one another as intellectual allies of the highest order and fell in love. They seem to have written on liberty together. So what's it about? At its heart is a rejection of the tyranny of the majority, the perennial temptation of democratic governments and others to trample minorities. If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, Mill asserts, and only one person held the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. Which is a development of his one very simple principle propounded in Chapter 1. That principle is, he says, that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, either individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number, is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be exercised against any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. On Liberty is an extended defence of this principle, which isn't as simple as it might appear. What constitutes harm is the central problem. In recent years, we've had people claiming they've been harmed by being offended. Mill has no time for that. If the test be offence to those whose opinions are attacked, he writes, I think experience shows that this offence is given whenever the attack is telling and powerful. On the other hand, most people think it's reasonable to censor hate speech. How to define it, though? Mill does address that question. To what extent he's what's nowadays called a free speech fundamentalist is for the reader to decide. Part of what makes On Liberty so important is that it's much more than a defence of free speech. Chapter 3 of Individuality defends the rights of individuals to live the kinds of lives that suit them. The more idiosyncratic, the better. Originality, he writes, is the one thing that unoriginal minds cannot feel the use of. They cannot see what it is to do for them. How could they? If they could see what it would do for them, it would not be originality. It's worth noting in passing that Mill was one of the greatest progressive politicians in British history. The 20th century in this country was considerably better for his achievements in the 19th. There isn't time to consider that here, but of course, he's an easy search on Google. In any case, this is a book that's aged incredibly well. In his 1969 4 essays on liberty, the distinguished political philosopher Isaiah Berlin wrote, one of the symptoms of Mill's three-dimensional, rounded, authentic quality is that we feel sure we can tell where he would have stood on the issues of our own day. Arguably, that's as true now as it was then.